Hello everyone, welcome back to Powerful Nothing, a Magic the Gathering Cube podcast. I'm your host Dan, and as always, I'm joined by James. James, how are you doing on this warm day?
It is aggressively toasty, isn't it? I'm sure we have lots of listeners in countries that are this warm all the time, but if you've ever visited the UK in summer, you know that we can't cope.
Well, the UK, we're currently at temperatures that most Mediterranean countries would laugh at the temperature, but in our defense, all of our houses are designed to keep heat in. They're not the lack of any kind of aircon system in anyone's houses, really. We're feeling it. So if you hear, dear listener, the sound of a fan in the background at any point, I will do my best to try and remove it, but know that it is medically load bearing. But we have a banger episode for everyone today. As hot a topic as the temperature that me and James are both sweltering in. Today we're going to be talking about the lands deck in Cube. Before we jump into our main topic, just a reminder to you all that there will be a card gallery down in the show notes below if you're listening to this on your podcasting app. If you want to see the cards we're talking about, we will try and read them where possible, but sometimes we kind of get caught up in the moment. There'll be nice pretty pictures in the show notes below. While you're down there, please consider giving the podcast a 5-star review, thumbs up, tell a friend, whatever positive affirmation your podcasting platform allows you to do, please consider doing it. Right, preamble done, check. Let's move on to our main topic. Today we're going to be talking about the lands deck in Cube. So I think, James, a good place to start with this is what do we mean by the lands deck? Don't all draft decks have 17 lands, James? What are we talking about when we are specifically talking about the lands deck?
Yeah, so with lands deck, we're basically talking about a strategy where we're going to use our lands for more than just tapping for mana. This isn't just the sort of 5-color deck where we're making a bunch of different colors to cast powerful spells. This is our lands are doing more for us than that. So we might be, for example, sacrificing our lands for value, recurring them from the graveyard, might be using them to interact with our opponent, or even lock our opponent out of the game. But we might be getting board advantage out of them, we might be drawing cards off them, but we're doing more than just tapping them for mana and casting our powerful spells.
No, I think that makes sense. Yeah. I think one thing that's important is so James, this isn't like a 5-color multicolored deck. It's more the value comes from mechanics like landfall rather than domain is kind of what I want to say with it.
Exactly, yeah. Stuff like landfall, stuff like Crucible, recurring lands out of the graveyards, things like even a Dark Depths combo if you want to get spicy or something like that.
No, awesome. That makes a ton of sense. And kind of I think just from a broad point of view, kind of what kind of cubes can the lands deck show up in, would you say?
So this is quite a nice thing about it. It's a really broad archetype, so really any power level of cube, I think. It certainly can and does show up in the highest power level cubes. Powered cube, there's I'd say more of a lands package than a full-on lands archetype, but it is very, very powerful. It works really well. But if you go down to more sort of mid-power level cubes, you obviously have way more options in terms of the land synergies that you can build in.
And I guess would you say maybe the restriction is maybe peasant and pauper might struggle a little bit? I did just Google strip mine is technically is peasant legal.
Strip mine is peasant legal. And you could put strip mine in your peasant cube, it would be fine. I question if you should put ways to strip mine lock your opponent in peasant cube, you know? Because, having a strip mine in your deck does not make it a lands deck, right? But if your game plan is to recur the strip mine a bunch of times, then that does lead you in that direction.
No, and I think that's a very good point. It's not just a deck that's running a bunch of utility lands. It is specifically trying to get some additional value out of them in some way that kind of gives it that strip mine in some cubes is a very solid pack one, pick one. But just because you have that in your deck, you're not playing a lands deck. It's if you combine that with something else, like the recursive effects, that's where you go from a card to a archetype or a strategy or a deck, and that's kind of where we're going to be looking at today. Let's talk about the cards we see in the highest powered level cubes. Kind of what does our lands package look like, James? In something like the Mitgo Vintage Cube, or something like you have a powered cube, or the Arena powered cube. Kind of what describe the package to us in that sort of environment.
Yeah, so I think if you're looking at the very highest power level of cubes, probably the most powerful little package of synergy that's based around lands that you almost always see in these cubes is some type combination of Titania, Baloth Prime, so they obviously both, whenever you sacrifice a land, you get a creature. In the case of Titania, it's a 5/3. In the case of Baloth Prime, it's a 4/4. And combining those with a free sacrifice outlet for your lands. So this is good if you have a bunch of other ways to sacrifice lands. You get a bit of extra value. Maybe you have a strip mine. Maybe you have a bunch of fetchers. But this is also, you can just view as a pretty lean, like A plus B combo, right? If you play Titania, you get a land back. With 5 lands in play, you get a land back from your graveyard. You have 6 lands in play. If you sacrifice them all, that's 30 power. That's probably going to win you the game. So it doesn't like necessarily matter that much if you have a really fleshed out lands deck around it, but it is better if you do, because it means you're more likely to have a land in the graveyard for your Titania to get back. Plus, Titania in a lands deck can be very powerful, even if you don't have the Zoran Orb or the Sylvan Safekeeper or whatever to immediately sack all your lands, because you can just go Titania, get back my strip mine you. I now have, that's for 5 mana. I've put 10 power on the board and made 2 5/3s and killed your land. That's really powerful. But yeah, it was a pretty lean little package to start off with. And honestly, that is like one of the best things Green is doing in those cubes at the moment. It plays out really, really well. It gets the game over with very quickly in a way that doesn't really care about creature removal very much. And that's quite powerful.
Yeah, just a few things I do kind of want to touch on then, actually. So specifically, for those unaware, a card like Zoran Orb, why it's quite powerful when you combine it with Titania and Baloth Prime, is Zoran Orb is 0 mana for an artifact that says, sacrifice a land, you gain 2 life. So it's a free sacrifice outlet. Like, think of it like it's a... You know how in like an aristocrat deck we love a Viscera's Seer because it's free. We can respond to stuff. We don't have to put any mana into it. This is that, but for lands. Basically, it's a cheap, efficient way of putting a land from your deck or from the battlefield into the graveyard. And like this deck, like Titania will work with cards like fetch lands as well. But it's not something you can. But it's not repeatable, if that makes sense. Like a fetch land with Titania will make you 1 elemental. But Zoran Orb, you can sack all your land straight away and make that 30 power that James is on about. That's where it gets very scary.
Yes, exactly. Titania without the sack outlet is an excellent value card. Titania with the sack outlet generally wins you the game the next turn.
Yeah, definitely. Makes sense.
Yeah. And it's worth saying, I guess, as well, there are other free sack outlets you could play. The 2 you most commonly see are Sylvan Safekeeper and Zoran Orb, because they're both very cheap, 0 mana and 1 mana. They're colorless and green. Obviously, green is the sort of a base color of this whole package. And they both have some utility outside of this. So Sylvan Safekeeper can be quite nice with Nardu specifically. Both it protects for Nardu and it triggers for Nardu. Zoran Orb, you can end up playing in some Academy decks because it's a 0 mana artifact, and it combines quite well with balance in particular. You can sacrifice all your lands and then balance them, and they have a bad time. That's quite fun. But they're both, like, the main reason they're in at this point is doing this Titania Baloth Prime stuff.
That makes sense. Yeah. Just for everyone's benefit, Sylvan Safekeeper, a single green for a 1/1 with the same ability of sacrifice a land, then target creature you control gains Shroud. So it's another free sacrifice outlet. It's nice and cheap, and also green is quite nice because creature tutors, being able to go and get Sylvan Safekeeper and your Titania or your Baloth Prime is nice. You can get both halves of your combo, as it were, and then the added ability to actually protect your creature from a removal spell is going to be nice as well. And like that target is what James was talking about with the Nardu specifically, which is very nice. So the sacrifice a land, make a bunch of power with a Titania or a Baloth Prime. That's kind of like the more combo-y version. But there are kind of, I guess, like more classic kind of grindy versions, and like running. This is definitely something that's kind of got more juice over the last couple of years, just because we've seen more of these effects printed. But like classic like cube cards like Wasteland and Strip Mine. Like Wasteland is a land that taps out a colorless, or you can sacrifice it to destroy target non-basic land, and Strip Mine is the same thing, but you can sack it to destroy any land. That with kind of Crucible of Worlds which is an effect that lets you replay lands from your graveyard. That's always been kind of like a thing in kind of like the back burn, if that makes sense. It's been a thing in Cube since Crucible got printed, but like especially in the last couple of years, there's just been this additional. There's so many of these Crucible effects now. Like it's basically a Crucible of World effect has become like on like the list of things to put in a set. We're getting kind of like 2 or 3 a year now, so there's so much redundancy and so many cool ones to talk to. But kind of like James, when we're talking about this, we'll use the term Crucible effect and Strip Mine effect, but basically we are destroying a land, playing that land again the next turn, and destroying another land. Kind of like, how, like, what is the dynamic with that? Like, how does that play out? Like, why is that good?
Yeah, so if we take the sort of the most basic version of this effect, right, Crucible of Worlds, 3 mana artifact, can play lands out of your graveyard, and a Strip Mine, which you can sack to destroy any land. So if you combine these 2 cards, it is powerful. You have strong efficient value there. So that's every turn, I'm going to play the Strip Mine out of my graveyard. I'm going to Strip Mine one of your lands. And if you're continuing to, and say that I start doing that when you're on 3 mana, if you continue to play a land every turn, you will stay on 3 mana and be able to cast your 3 drops. So I'm stopping you getting more mana, but it's not amazing for me. But at some point, you start missing land drops, right? And then I'm eventually going to run you out of lands, and you'll get down to no mana, and then I can start using my land drops for other stuff, develop my own mana, and you're never going to have more than 1 mana again in the game, because the turns you do top deck a land, I'll play the Strip Mine out of my graveyard and Strip Mine it. The turns you don't, I'm going to play a different land and keep getting ahead on mana. So that is powerful. It's hard. It's a very hard to disrupt way of slowly getting some incremental advantage, but it is very slow, and it doesn't affect the board. So if I go, say, turn 3 Strip Mine, you turn 4, I'm going to play the Crucible, play the Strip Mine again. That's fine if the board's empty, but if you have like 1 okay creature on the board, then all of a sudden that game plan looks pretty dicey, right?
Yeah, it's sort of why, like, early on, like when I first played Strip Mine and Crucible of Worlds, it was in a white deck where I had, like, cheap removal and, like, Mother of Runes to kind of, like, that's how, like, this was quite a while ago. Don't do this anymore, kids. Boris has got some tools since then. But kind of, like, that was more the shell for this rather than in green. Is that fair, James?
Yeah, for sure. So how it tends to end up playing now, I think, is you want to be, like, green something and you have a bunch of answers. So you tend to be quite a few colors, so you have a lot of really good removal. You can not fall behind on board, and you can try and attrition them out that way. And that stuff is fine, but I say it is very slow. The one that has kind of changed the dynamic a little bit, though, because I felt like that was kind of struggling as a package, the Ice-Till Explorer specifically has really changed this dynamic.
This is a good one. Do you want to read Ice-Till Explorer, James?
Yeah, for sure. So Ice-Till Explorer is 2 greens, so 4 mana total, for a 1/4.
2/4.
2/4. I was doing it from memory. I've never attacked with an Ice-Till Explorer. I have no idea what the power is.
Reasonable.
Yeah, 4 mana, 2/4. You can play an additional land on each of your turns, and you can play lands out of your graveyard, and it also has a landfall trigger. Whenever you play a land, you mill a card.
It does everything, James.
It does so much. It's really nice. And why that's huge, right, is that extra land drop each turn means that I'm not just waiting for you to run out of lands to play from hand. I'm actually putting you down lands each turn proactively, because I'm destroying 2 of your lands, right? I'm blowing up your lands faster than you can play them if I've got the Strip Mine going. Or I'm destroying your land and playing my own land, so I'm still continuing to develop my mana. Plus, on top of that, even if I don't have the Strip Mine, right? Even if I just have a fetch land, I'm still getting a ton of value off of this, right? I'm ramping pretty damn hard with this card. And if I have the Strip Mine or the Wasteland in my deck somewhere, and I have my fetch land going, I'm generating a bunch of mana, but I'm also digging for that Strip Mine or that Wasteland with the mill effects on the landfall. Yeah, and on top of that, all of that, it's actually a really good blocker, right? 2/4 It's pretty resistant to a lot of the red removal spells. It'll jump in the way of a lot of cheap creatures. It doesn't, pull you back from behind amazingly well, but it is very relevant as a blocker if your opponent just has sort of one or two smaller creatures in play. So this has been, in my opinion, a real game changer for this archetype. We've had, as you said, we've had a ton of new Crucible effects printed in the last few years. All the others are sort of fine, but maybe small incremental improvements on the baseline Crucible, whereas this one's a real game changer.
No, exactly, and the fact it's in green as well means that this probably isn't coming out on turn 4. We are going to probably have ramped beforehand, so we can start the train rolling on our turn 3. Like, our opponent might be untapping on their turn 3 with one land, if things have gone to plan. Like, that could be quite powerful. But why specifically this has got a lot better is Icefield Explorer, I think, is around the $15 mark at time of recording, but and Crucible maintains its value. I'm assuming I'm going to say Commander because it's colorless, it goes in a much deck, but all of the other ones, there's a card like Walking Closet is around $7. That's the room one that also lets you play lands from your graveyard. There's also Conduit of Worlds. This one is less than $4. That's the 4-mana artifact that you can play. You can do the Crucible of World things, but then you can tap it to choose target non-land permanent card in your graveyard. If you haven't cast a spell this turn, you may cast that card. If you do, you can't cast additional spells this turn. Activate only as a sorcery. But there's enough of these effects now. There will be more that we haven't mentioned. And there'll be one that we are going to mention in a sec because it's very good. But there's a bunch of redundancy now, so it's also nice to kind of for larger cubes as well. This can be supported. Yes, there's Strip Mine and there's Wasteland, but there's a bunch of in a 540 cube, we're going to see both halves of the combo, as it were. I know there was one other one you want to touch on, James, which was specifically Renin 6. Do you want to read out Renin 6? Because that one, this has been a decent cube card for a while, but got better in this deck basically.
Yeah, for sure. Ren 6 is pretty powerful. So Ren 6 is a red and a green, so just 2 mana for a legendary Planeswalker Ren. It starts with 3 loyalty. You can plus it to return 1 target land card from your graveyard to your hand. You can -1 to deal 1 damage to any target. And the -7, which does come up occasionally, is you get an emblem with instance and sorcery spells in your graveyard have retrace. So that's you can cast them from your graveyard by discarding a land. But the main thing we're here for is just that +1, right? It's not sort of as explosive as something like Icestill because you can't obviously use it multiple times in a turn, whereas Icestill lets you play the land again. But it is 2 mana. 2 mana is huge. And I mean, this is a phenomenal card even if you're just getting back a fetch land. If you have 2 or 3 fetch lands in your deck, I'm already in for running Renin 6. But if you have the Wasteland or the Strip Mine is obviously the nuts here, it's such an efficient card. Plus, that -1, just 2 mana, kill your elf, kill your Ragavan is so powerful. Kill your Mother of Runes. And that sort of, that really helps with the downside of a card like Crucible, which is 3 mana and doesn't affect the board in any way, right? Venom 6 is not a card that requires necessarily loads of building around, but it does, if you have these really powerful lands to recur, it does become very, very powerful.
Yeah, and kind of in more powerful cubes, this is more the type of card that we're looking for than a Crucible of Worlds, because it's in hyper level cubes, we need efficiency. We need just raw, to be honest with you, just raw power level, if that makes sense. And like Crucible has it if you specifically have all the bits around it. But if you're not in the deck, why would you take it? Whereas a Renin 6, again, you mentioned if you have a Strip Mine, awesome, take it. But again, it's just good if you have fetch lands or anything like that. And yeah, very solid card.
Yeah, just on the final subject for Ren 6, it is now surprisingly affordable. It's only $14. I was distressed to
That's
learn.
quite good.
I don't want to say how much I bought my Ren 6s for.
Ooh, so I'm the flip side. I know Wifey got onto it before they shot up in price for Legacy, and then sold them after they were banned, I think.
Yeah, I convinced myself it would be fun to play Modern and bought some Ren 6s, and I was wrong. That's fine.
Oh, it's still legal. It's still legal.
It's still legal in Modern. Yeah, it's just less good than it used to be.
When was the last time you played Modern, James?
I don't know, when Venom 6 was good, like 2022, some nonsense like that.
Tight. Okay. Marvelous. But yeah, let's stick with powerful cubes for a sec. There's one big landy outlier that I kind of want to talk about. It's a very unique effect. This might be one of your favorite cards, James. It's definitely it's a card you added to my cube for winning a bunch of or for winning it enough. Let's talk about Fast Bond. It's a single green for an enchantment. You may play any number of lands on each of your turns. Whenever you play a land, if it wasn't the first land you played this turn, Fast Bond deals 1 damage to you. James, talk to us about how this can be very, very egregious when we combine it with some of the effects that we've talked about. So, Fast Bond lets us play any number of lands a turn. Yes, we lose a life. Don't worry about it. It'll be fine. But how does this work with things like fetch lands or strip mine? And how does that then combine with effects that let us play lands from our graveyard? Like, talk to us about that powerful loop.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Fast Bond's just a super powerful card. You can do some pretty busted stuff with it. It's one of my favourite cards in these cubes. You're sadly not really meant to be out there first picking Fast Bonds anymore, I'm afraid to say. It's that's not so much what these cubes are about anymore. But it still does have that really high ceiling, right? Of when you really get it to pop off, it's amazing. And it's amazing in a bunch of different contexts, right? And it doesn't have to be specifically a land deck. It's also amazing with like draw 7s, things like that. It can go well in a sort of storm adjacent deck. But in our lands deck, it has a few really powerful applications. So if we have, say, a Crucible and a Strip Mine, obviously they just have no lands. Instantly, the turn you play your Crucible, that's amazing. Then they're basically not casting spells for the rest of the game. That's dope. But also, if we just have Crucible and a fetch land, we can now pay a life, or pay 2 life to fetch land out of our deck as many times as we want with that fetch land, or as long as we have fetchable lands left. So that's really powerful. It's sort of like, you can almost think of it as like a mini channel, but it's getting you permanent lands in play rather than just colorless mana for a turn. Plus, it's like at a certain point, the thinning aspect actually becomes very relevant there. If you have any sort of landfall trigger going at the same time, you're gonna wrap up the game pretty quickly at that point. But then it also has a really powerful application there if you add in Zerran Orb, which we discussed we already want to be running in these cubes for the application with Titania. But Zerran Orb with Fast Bond and a Crucible, because you can pay a life to play the land out of your graveyard. When you sack it you tap it for mana, then you sack it to Zerran Orb and gain 2 life. So you end up plus a life and plus a mana each time. So that's actually is infinite mana, infinite life. You should be able to close out the game from there.
Yeah. Yeah, and if that's a fetch land, you've removed every land from your deck as well, while also going through that loop as well. Yeah, Fast Bond is a lot of fun, and like there are other cards kind of like that like incidentally work with this, like Courser of Kruphix, James, that has landfall. When a land enters the battlefield under your control, you gain a life. Yeah,
sadly, if we're talking about strictly the highest power level cubes, Modern Horizons has kind of done a number on Courser of Kruphix, I'm afraid to say.
I know, but I still like Courser of Kruphix. It's still cool.
Oh, yeah, it's sick. I mean, I'm not objecting to it. Put Courser in, put Oracle of Moldara in, you'll have a great time.
Well, this is a separate issue for this deck of just like a bunch of the cards they print for it all tend to be 3 mana. So it's competitive, but it does mean there is a lot of redundancy and you can tailor it to what you want, which is quite nice. But with infinite landfall, this kind of brings us on to a bunch of very powerful creatures that are just some of the best things that green can be doing. And the fact it works so nicely in this build, and like you don't just have to have the Fast Bond. Like any ways of playing multiple lands a turn, like the Ice Still Explorer, are going to be good. Talk to us about like Bristly Bill, James, or a card like Tireless Tracker. Kind of like these. How do these get benefits in this type of shell?
Yeah, so these are mostly going to be useful if you're in a slightly less combo-y version of the deck, right? Like, obviously, Bristly Bill isn't necessary if you're gaining infinite life and drawing infinite cards and making infinite mana, right? But if you're just like, oh, dope, I've got like a Ren and 6 and a Strip Mine, and maybe I'm turboing a little bit, maybe I've got an Exploration, something like that, then all these landfall creatures, which are already good cards, right? They're playing into your like normal proactive green plan. Your Bristly Bill, your Scythecat Cub, your Tireless Tracker, they're going to put a lot of power and toughness onto a board, and that is just going to be happening more frequently at a higher rate in a lands deck, because you're going to be more reliably making your land drops, because you're recurring your lands. You might be making extra land drops with something like Exploration or Fast Bond. So it just puts these already powerful cards up a notch, which is really nice. And then finally, the other nice thing with this, we've talked about a few sort of distinct little packages of synergy which work really well for the land space in the powered cubes, but they all also work well together and they all make each other better, right? Like my Crucible is actually really good with my Titania, right? Because even if I don't have the sack outlet, I can play my fetch land out of my graveyard and make a 5/3 every turn. Or with my Baloth Prime. The Fast Bond, also very powerful with those cards because you're getting them out earlier. You're getting your fetch lands into your graveyard earlier. So it doesn't have to be I have this little pocket package in my deck. If you get a bunch of these things together, they all build on top of each other pretty nicely.
Yeah, what's really nice about this deck is kind of like there is a lot of overlap. Like a lot of cards here overlap with cards here, and they synergize together very, very nicely. But we have been focusing a lot on the highest power level of cubes. Let's go down a bit at power level. Like maybe we're talking more like mid-rangey cubes, more budget environments, cubes that kind of like aren't running the most powerful cards. They're not running the most powerful cards, as it were. They're kind of maybe someone's first cube or an upgraded cube, something like that. There's still a bunch of things we can do here, James. Like in our last episode, we touched a bit on like a graveyard lands deck. Do you want to touch on like on how we can use self-milling as a way to power up a lands deck?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff in this space, and it is all quite powerful. Actually, this isn't something that I think is aimed at peasant and pauper cubes and things like that. It's just you probably need to not have like Vagavan and Ocelot Pride and Forfailingus in your cube for this stuff to be good enough, But there's a ton of really interesting stuff in this space. I think there's several different versions, but one I quite like is a slightly more graveyard-centric version of the lands deck, where you're doing a lot of self-milling, and you can use cards like Aftermath Analyst and Splendid Reclamation. These are both cards that return all your lands in your graveyard to play at once. So Aftermath Analyst is a 2-mana 1/3 that mills you for some amount when it enters, and you can pay 4 mana and sack it to get all your lands back from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. And Splendid Reclamation is just a 4-mana sorcery that gets all your lands back from your graveyard tapped. And you can end up doing some pretty interesting stuff where you're like sacrificing your lands to generate mana with something like Squandered Resources, which is for green-black enchantment, where you get to sack your lands for mana, or even something like Reign of Filth, where you just get to sack your lands for black until the end of turn. And then you sack all your lands, you make tons of mana, you get them all back, you can sack them all again. You can get some, you end up generating like a ton of mana in one turn, play almost sort of as a Storm adjacent deck, which is quite cool.
Yeah, or like a Golgari High Tide type thing, which is cool.
Exactly, yeah. And there's lots of really interesting overlap with trying to do those loops. So there's cards like Spelunking is one I quite like in this space. This is a 2 and a green enchantment. When it enters, you can put an extra land into play and you draw a card. And it makes all lands enter untapped. So this can do really powerful stuff with something like Aftermath Analyst, because if you're bringing back tons of lands and they're all untapped, and you could tap them and sacrifice them again, then you're obviously generating a ton of mana. You can also do things with things like the bounce lands are very powerful here, like having them enter untapped. You can tap them immediately for 2 mana, then return them to your hand. That's pretty good. Plus, kind of like Lotus Field, I think, is a really nice build around here. This is the recently banned in Modern Land.
No, was it?
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, it does powerful things.
Marvelous.
So it's a land with hexproof. It taps for 3 mana of any one color, which is rather powerful. And but when it enters, you have to sacrifice 2 other lands. Or you have to sacrifice 2 lands, I guess. So don't play it without 2 other lands in play normally, because you'll have to sacrifice itself. But this is really nice in that if you have any ways to untap it, it goes kind of ham, right? Like, it's cool to have, something to do with a candelabra or something to do with a high tide that isn't just Tolarian Academy, right? I think that's cool. But then it also puts a bunch of lands in your graveyard to get your other land graveyard synergies going. It's really cool with balance. That's quite nice, because you effectively have 3 lands in play because you have 3 mana, but as balance counts it, you only have 1 land in play, and that's pretty dope. And there's a bunch of nice payoffs for putting lands in the graveyard as well. Probably the best value engine here is the Gitrog monster, which is a card I really like.
This is another... this one is kind of... I love the Gitrog. It's an awesome commander, but yeah, very cool in Cube, and I would like to get it working more. I'll read this one out. It's 3 black and a green for a 6/6 frog horror with Death Touch, and I think if you upkeep, sacrifice the Gitrog monster unless you sack a land. You may play an additional land on each of your turns, and then I guess importantly for this deck, James, whenever 1 or more lands are put into your graveyard from anywhere, draw a card. So not only are we possibly going infinite with our Zuranorb type stuff, we're also drawing our whole deck as well. That seems rad.
Yeah, this card could kind of just draw your deck some of the time. If you really get there on this deck, it can be pretty sweet. And that extra land drop is really big, right? And it's just a 6/6. It's one of those cards where it's like,
it's very big.
I have no idea why it's a 6/6, but it is a 6/6. And it has the most irrelevant line of Death Touch I have ever seen. But there you go.
I'm assuming they got the artwork first before they... and I was like, oh, right, okay.
I mean, yeah, it does look like you would have Death Touch, to be fair. But yeah, I think... And you just get a lot of those cool build-arounds, right? Like the Lord Windgrace is another one I think is quite cool. That's like a Jund 5-mana Planeswalker, which could get lands in your graveyard and take lands out of your graveyard. It generates a lot of value for you. Sort of how I view this deck is... think about like the most obnoxious lands deck you've ever played against in a game of Commander.
Yeah.
I think it's fun to recreate that in Cube,
Mm-hmm.
Like, to me, there are some things which are not socially acceptable to Commander table, but are a lot of fun to put together in 40-card formats,
No, I'd agree. And I think part of the biggest difference between playing this in Draft and playing the Commander deck that's led by the Gitrog monster or led by Lord Windgrace is that you don't have access to them straight away. You have to play a game of Magic, and then you might find it, and then you might draw it. You have to kind of build your engine, and then you might get this kind of the payoff value card that's kind of like it's not saying in the command zone basically, and that's like one of the nice things about 40-card formats in general. So
yeah, and I think these things are always cooler in Cube as well, just because you don't have a perfect version, right? By definition, you don't have all the pieces, and you're having to try and make it work, and it's different every time. Versus, you play it in a constructed format, and it's it's always the perfectly tuned engine, and you always find what you need. Whereas in Draft, you have to work for it a bit more, right? Which is cool.
No, I'd agree. I think there's one lands deck package archetype that probably a bunch of listeners are kind of shouting, why have we not got to it yet? Because and the reality is kind of it belongs here in this kind of mid power level of cubes. It doesn't mean it's not cool, but it's time for us to talk about Dark Depths. Dark Depths is rad, but it has been power crept out of the highest power level cubes. For those unaware, Dark Depths is a legendary snowland. Enter the battlefield with 10 ice counters on it. You can pay 3 generic mana to remove an ice counter from Dark Depths, but the gimmick is we never do that. Because when Dark Depths has no ice counters on it, sacrifice it. If you do, create Marit Lage, a legendary 2020 black avatar squiddly fish with flying and indestructible. We're going to combine it with an effect that either removes all the counters from it or makes a copy of Dark Depths without any counters. So we have things like Vampire Hexmage is the classic way of removing counters from a permanent, or cards like Thespian Stage or Mirage Mirror make a copy of Dark Depths with no counters on it. The ability says it has no counters on it, therefore we sack it straight away and we make that big 2020. This is rad. It is cool. It's not very good. I love it so much. It will always... Dark Depths will probably... I'm just checking the updated version of my list. Okay, it's finally come out. But it has been in my list for the best... since its inception, because I think it's cool and awesome. But James, talk to us about... What do you think about Dark Depths in 2026?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a very unique combo, especially with the Thespian Stage angle, right? There's not really many other ways to win the game in a reasonable amount of time where literally all you have to do is play lands, right? No spells need to go on the stack at any point. You just go Dark Depths, land, Thespian Stage, activate, 2020, attack, you win. Your opponent could have had Force of Will up the entire game, no one cared. And that's pretty cool. The problem is, right, you're down a lot of material because you're actually down 2 lands when you activate this, right? Because you make your Thespian Stage into a Dark Depths, you Legend Rule away the Dark Depths, so that's down 1 land. Then you sack the Thespian Stage because it has no count on it, and you make your 2020. And even if all that works and you're undisrupted and you draw your pieces, people do just have ways to kill the 2020 indestructible. Like, it's like, sure, if they're in red-black, then it's hard. But if they're in white, they're going to have exile removal. If they're in blue, they're going to have bounce spells. It's, and you kind of just lose the game when it gets dealt with because you put so much energy into it. And you had to run the Dark Depths, which doesn't tap for mana. I'm not saying it's unplayable, but it doesn't warrant being in like Powered Cube, and it was in like the Mitko version for a really long time. So I think people sort of associate it with being for a higher power level cube than it actually is. Because it is just quite slow. It's hard to get going, and it's hard to protect, you know?
I think it's more, it appeals to people who traditionally have played the Mitko Vintage Cube. Like as in like this dark, like this land, like this bit, like the Dark Depths Thespian Stage was a deck in like Legacy. It may have been like, was it ever a deck in Vintage? Probably. I don't know. Most things at some point are, but like it was more appealing to like that kind of crowd. It was there as a, it's only 2 cards, we'll throw it in. It is a cool thing you can do, and it is a deck, but like, yeah, it's, from a power level point of view, it doesn't belong there anymore. If that, like, I think that's fair. And like, there was a brief moment where we were kind of like, Baloth Prime. That's the card we talked about earlier. That does come in with stun counters, and it's a 10/10. Maybe that's like a second copy of Dark Depths. But the reality is, it's a second copy of Titania, not a second copy of Dark Depths. And Dark Depths, in general, because there's only one Dark Depths effect, only one true 2020, I win the game if I do this thing, and it's not answered. It's always struggled above 360s, in my opinion, as well, because it's like Thespian Stage is a fun card, but it's a dead card unless Dark Depths is open. That makes sense. Like at least with Kiki Jiki, you can Kiki Jiki a Inferno Titan, which I have done and won games with. Any other bit without a Dark Depths doesn't really do anything. Yeah,
for sure. It's one of those things where it's like, it's enough work, but for it to be good in those really powerful cubes, you'd need it to always win the game when you assembled the combo, and it just doesn't, right? There's too many ways to kill it. You can also just block it. It doesn't have trample. Like, play a Lingering Souls, and Merit Lay just does nothing, you know? That's like 4 turns of the Merit Lage does nothing. it can be a bit tough. But in the more mid-power level cubes, it's cool as an option because the thing this does, right, is it really pays you off for being able to find specific lands. So you can have a bit of a toolboxy thing going on, right? There's some very powerful land tutors, which you might want to play anyway, stuff like Expedition Map, stuff like Crop Rotation. And if you're trying to do a bit of a toolbox thing, then this is like a win condition that you can assemble with that. So if you're leaning into that, I'd also recommend having a few like slightly more niche utility lands, which you wouldn't normally include, like try the Bajuka Bog, for example, in Commander Cube. That's been pretty relevant. Or something like a Glacial Chasm is a nice one that can keep you alive. You can get a little bit of a toolbox effect going, which is quite cool.
Yeah, I was going to say a Glacial Chasm is a fun one. That's the cumulative upkeep, pay to life when it enters sack a land, but creatures you control can't. But and creatures you control can't attack. But the plus point is it prevents all damage that would be dealt to you. So while you have this out, you kind of can't lose the game. And if you have ways of recurring it, then you kind of can't lose the game.
Yeah. No, it's cool. And it does something quite unique, right? Which is, and it's something that these decks can really need because they can be quite slow and dirtly. And this is, your opponent has a giant board, you're at 6, and the Glacial Chasm can keep you alive, which is really valuable. You can also run something like, if you are in favor of proxies or have lots of money, you can run something like Tabernacle as well, which is quite cool. That's
definitely if you're a fan of proxies. That is the card that's $3,000.
Yes, for the love of God,
it's a good magic card too. It's a good magic
to put in your cube, but
or 7 ticks online. That's nice.
Because imagine you spend $3,000 and it would be like very playable and a very really niche deck that people draft once every now and again. But it's powerful.
Let's read the Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale. For legendary land, all creatures have at the beginning of your upkeep, destroy this creature unless you pay 1 generic. So it's like a good at keeping the aggro decks in check. It's a very solid land there. Legal in Commander. Sounds miserable. It's a game changer. We're kind of, just to bring us back on topic a little bit, kind of like in general in these decks, or in general in cubes, you will have room for some utility lands. Like I'm looking at mine. Like I run like Bazaar of Baghdad. I run cards like Field of Ruin, Caracas. When you have tutors for them, or when you have land tutors, maybe for this lands deck, those cards are going to go up in value as well because like they're more likely to be able to find them. Or things like Urza's Saga. You can kind of do some cool. I tutor for this, and then these get this, and then I can tutor further with my Urza's Saga. Like you can go tutor for your Zeranorb, for example, nice and tight. But
just to add that if you have a lot of these utility lands, Dark Depths, Glacial Chasm, especially the ones that don't tap for mana, then another really nice inclusion can be to get Urborg in there and Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth. So these are basically the same card in green and black. So Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth for green 1 is a legendary land that says each land is a forest in addition to its other types. And what this does, it's going to let your Dark Depths, your Glacial Chasm, your Tabernacle all tap for mana. Because the problem with these lands, right, is they're essentially not lands in your opening hand, right? They don't tap for mana, they don't let you cast your spells. A hand with like a forest and a Dark Depths you probably can't keep because you only have 1 mana, but a hand with a Yavimaya and a Dark Depths you can keep because you have 2 mana. And it lets you actually use that as a land early, and it removes a lot of the downside from having those utility lands in your deck, which is quite cool.
No, I'd agree, and I realize we're kind of jumping around into kind of like top tips of how to play the deck, but like from a building point of view, I also wouldn't consider a land that doesn't tap for mana a land. It doesn't go in like Glacial Chasm doesn't go in my land section. Like neither does like Dark Depths. Like if I want to run a 17 land deck, it's 17 plus Dark Depths or plus those effects, not including, because as James was saying, if you draw it, it's not going to be your turn one land. It's not going to, or it can be, but it's not going to do anything, basically. But kind of while we're just talking about like general tips and tricks to kind of make this deck work, kind of like from a cube design point of view, like we've gone over some bits of redundancy, but like we have talked about some cards that are kind of like very powerful one-offs. Like we talked about Fast Bond. Fast Bond is an incredibly powerful, unique Magic card, and like in an ideal world, we will take Fast Bond and we'll have it in our deck and in our opening hand all the time. Magic doesn't really work that way. Like, ideally, we would have some redundancy. And while we can't get as high as Fast Bond and some of the other effects, which we'll talk about, but like, there are still some cards that we can go to. Like, we talked how there was a bunch of Crucible of World effects out there. That's good. They can print those. You can't really print another copy of Fast Bond. I mean, I say this. Give it a year in Modern Horizons 4. There's like an energy one. It also makes an energy or something. I don't know. But like,
have I told you about fire design?
yeah. Actually, that would kind of. This is a big tangent, but like, you can pay an energy to put a land into play. That probably goes in for something. Ignore me. But like, there is some redundancy out there, and it is important to kind of look for it. So like, another reason why we liked Icetel Explorer is because the additional land drop means it sort of does the Fast Bond thing a little bit. Not as good, but a little bit. But it means you can run a card like Exploration, for example. Single green mana, enchantment, you may play an additional land on each of your turns. This card is not Fast Bond. But if you are trying to support this lands deck, remember that, especially if you're going up in size, if you're not at 360, if you're at a 540 or a 720, and not every card is being opened, what happens to the lands deck if it doesn't see Fast Bond? Not going to be as strong. But if we can give it something like an Exploration or these type of effects, you can still support the deck existing, and that is important.
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of these cards we've highlighted a lot of sort of specific combos and interactions which are very powerful, but they're certainly not the only synergies that will come up between these cards, right? If you include all these cards which are good at helping you move lands between zones at an accelerated rate, you will find new and interesting ways in which they interact with each other, and that's quite cool, I think. It doesn't always have to be this very streamlined, like, I've got my Titania and my Zera Orb, and those are the only things I care about, especially if you're, in the more mid-power level cube thing. You can kind of just throw a lot of these cards in and people will do interesting stuff with them, I've found.
Yeah, like there's just a bunch, like in the last couple of years, like there's just been a bunch of cool cards printed that go in this, like Tifa Lockhart, for example, from Final Fantasy, 1 green, 1/2, trample and landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, double its power and turn. There has been some turn 2. There's been some turn 1 and 2 kills with this in the powered cube recently. Like, that's kind of rad. Like, we haven't touched, like, we mentioned Bristly Bill. We didn't mention Scythecat Cub. There's all these kind of cool, powerful cards. And kind of Scythecat Cub and Bristly Bill are just good cards. But if you're doing infinite land drops, they can become your win con. Like, and these are cards that already run in a bunch of cubes. So it's ways of pushing you over the edge, which I don't think we're short on now. There's a bunch of very, very cool options out there. And then I guess just some final bits of advice, James. Like, specifically most of what we touched on so far has been kind of like how to, like, or cards to consider to put in a cube or to put in your deck. But kind of like, what happens when you actually have the deck? Like, how do these kind of decks play out? Kind of like, what are your good matchups? What are your bad matchups? Like, kind of like, are there any tips and tricks on actually playing the lands deck, as it were? Yeah,
for sure. I mean, gameplay choices are going to obviously vary massively depending on what sort of build you have, what sort of cube you're in. But in terms of matchups, there are certainly some common themes. So the land synergy stuff, it tends to not be the fastest deck, but it's often one of the most resilient. It can be pretty hard to disrupt the engine once it's going. Partly just because, right, lands are fundamentally a difficult type to interact with. You can't counterspell someone playing a land. You can't Thoughtseize their land. You can't generally kill their land very easily.
Like they can just do it at the start of their turn without you being able to do anything. Like when they have priority,
yeah,
they can technically take it back as well.
Yeah. True. And most cubes, will have in a 720 cube, you might have like 60 spells that can kill a creature. You're gonna have like 0 to 2 that can kill a land. So it's pretty hard for people to disrupt you if you're getting value off your lands inherently. And that means you have inevitability against a lot of decks. So you tend to do quite well against the control decks, quite well against the mid-rangey decks. But what are you giving up for that? You're giving up some speed. If someone has a very fast draw with an aggressive deck, you can struggle with that. So I would really, for that reason, I'd prioritize cheap creature removal. I really like to have one sweeper in my land decks if I can find one, and if my mana supports it. Because you're not gonna generally get your engine going quick enough that you can beat someone. You can base someone who's gone 1 drop, 2 drop, 3 drop without interacting with them. Also against combo decks, against fast combo can be a really tough matchup for these decks because you're not going to have a ton of permission. You don't tend to be base blue. Sure, maybe you get a discard spell, but you're not going to be able to prioritize that over the more important stuff, over things like fetch lands, over your key synergy pieces. So quick combo can be a really tough matchup. Like I certainly don't want to play against Reanimator or Storm or anything like that here. But you tend to do well against the control decks, and the soupy 4 or 5 color decks tend to be a nice matchup for you.
That makes sense. Kind of like in terms of what our deck looks like. Because I think basically I'm looking at the card gallery I've been making as we've made this, and there are 3 cards without green in them somewhere. But I'm assuming because of the fact that we want fetch lands, or we want even if the cube doesn't have specifically like Arid Mesa, like Onslaught, Zendikar fetch lands, we're still going to want like Evolving Wilds or Terramorphic Expanse, or even like the of this type of deck they were trying the lands from Modern Horizons 3 that cycle and can fetch kind of one of 3 colors. So is it fair to say that kind of like the core of the deck is green, but the rest of the deck can just be like what's open, or like good card? Like this isn't the 4 or 5 color deck, but it can splash. Is that fair?
Yeah, for sure. You'll always be base green. You might have a second base color, you might not. But yeah, you'll certainly be splashing some cards outside of that. Because we can't just be a pile of synergy pieces, right? We want to be able to kill some creatures. As I said, that's really important. We don't want to be too far behind. And green can't kill a creature. Green has never been able to kill a creature. So we want to be splashing. So red is a really popular splash. Black is a very popular splash. But you can kind of be anything. Also, we're talking about assembling lots of contextually powerful cards that don't do that much on their own. So some amount of selection is going to be really valuable here. Green, again, not brilliant at that. Like, you have Malevolent Rumble, that card's amazing, but outside of that, it gets a little bit tough. So going into black for some tutors can be really powerful, or into blue just for some card draw can be really good.
Yeah, definitely. And also on the topic of splashing, when we are splashing, we are still being sensible. We're maybe splashing like 1 pip. Like, I know we've talked about Vampire Hexmage in this episode, but that's one reason why the Dark Death combo isn't as solid as it used to be, or doesn't put up the numbers as much anymore, because it's double black pips are quite hard. Like, I'm like, don't be good with your splashing is kind of what I'm trying to get. I'm trying to get at here, because yeah, this is the kind of deck that like will take some fetch lands and could pick up a Triome, but it is still we're going to have a bunch of green pips in the deck. We are definitely a green deck splashing. We're not like the Omnath. I have a bunch of individual colors and they all come together because I just need to make 1 of each. We need probably double green quite consistently in this deck to make it work.
Yeah, for sure. And it's So it can often be nice to have, like green +1 as a base color, or even just green as a base color can be pretty good. And then, we can be confident that we're going to have our mana set up late game, but the early game. So it's fine to have some win conditions which are a bit more spicy on the mana requirements, but you need to make sure your early game setup stuff you're staying disciplined.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Also, final point on that, be aware that a bunch of the lands you put in your deck aren't lands. We sort of said this from a cube building point of view. The same very much applies from a deck building point of view. You can't play 17 lands and include Dark Depths and Glacial Chasm and Strip Mine as lands. If they don't tap for mana, they don't count as lands. Even things like Strip Mine, Wasteland, things like that, I'm sort of counting as half a land because you really want to use it as a spell a lot of the time. So often the actual land count will be like 20-ish sometimes in these decks if you have a ton of these utility lands.
Yeah, definitely, that's very sensible. And also, it's a thing of like, if the thing our deck is doing is lands anyway, it makes sense that we're not going to run 17. We're not going to run 16. We're going to run slightly more. We're going to up that number. And yeah, it makes a bunch of sense if we don't include effects that don't tap for mana. Like, they're almost enchantments. They're almost artifacts, if that makes sense. You can just only play one a turn for free, but we love that for us. All right, marvelous. I think that's going to do it for today. James, pleasure, man. Yeah. Lands is a very cool topic, and like one thing that's really cool about it is kind of like there's also so many other synergies and cool combos out there that you can kind of run, and they're going to keep printing more, which is very nice because landfall is very popular. Planes like Zendikar and that kind of stuff are very popular. We're going to get more of these effects and kind of like this I feel has been the most improved, or like green in cube has improved so dramatically over the last couple of years, specifically because of cards like, or because of this type of deck, and that's been very cool to see, and yeah, good to talk about it today.
Yeah, for sure. I think this stuff feels like a lot more where green is at in most cubes now, rather than, Elvish Mystic based strategies.
You love Craterhoof Behemoth, James, don't I? All right. But that's going to do it for today. James, pleasure, man. Thank you very much. That was a good chat.
Yeah, always a pleasure.
Marvellous. All right. This leads me to thank you all very much for listening. As a reminder, please give the podcast a 5-star review. Tell a friend. It greatly helps us out. Until next time, it's goodbye from me, and it's goodbye from James, and we'll see you all soon. Goodbye.